Florida sells you the same lie every year. Beaches packed shoulder to shoulder, theme parks with 3-hour wait times, vacation rentals that cost more per week than some people's mortgages. And somehow we keep buying it. But here's what the tourism board doesn't want you to know. There's another Florida, not the one on the brochures, not the one your coworker posts from their Miami rental, the one locals guard like a family recipe. We're talking about 12 places where the Gulf sunsets are just as perfect, the seafood is fresher, and you won't spend $18 on parking just to access a beach. Places where the biggest decision you'll make all day is which sandbar to anchor at, or whether the fish shack opens at 11, or whenever Carol feels like unlocking the door. These aren't hidden because they're bad. They're hidden because they're inconvenient to reach, impossible to Instagramify into something mainstream, and require you to accept trade-offs that most tourists won't. No Target, no Starbucks, sometimes no cell service. Your navigation app will literally ask you, are you sure? But if you can handle a little remoteness, a few mosquitoes, and the kind of Florida that existed before air conditioning made this state habitable for Yankees, you'll find something most people only see in old postcards. Authentic, affordable, and absolutely worth the drive down roads you didn't know existed. From oyster towns that time forgot to artist colonies painted in colors that shouldn't exist in nature. From spiritualist camps where your neighbor might be a medium to Everglades outposts where the post office is smaller than your bathroom. This is the Florida tourists drive past on their way to somewhere more convenient. We'll visit a town where everyone talks to the dead professionally, another that's been destroyed and rebuilt by hurricanes so many times the insurance companies just gave up, and one where the entire population would fit in a college lecture hall. And that's exactly why it's better. If you're tired of tourist traps and ready for the real thing, hit that like button and drop a comment telling us which hidden Florida spot we missed. Let's take a drive. Number 12. Apalachicola, the Oyster Renaissance. We're starting in the Panhandle, about 80 miles southwest of Tallahassee, in a town that produces 90% of Florida's oysters and approximately 10% of its tourists. Apalachicola sits on the bay that shares its name, and if you've never heard of it, that's exactly how the 2,200 residents prefer it. This is Victorian Florida, not the pastel art deco of South Beach. We're talking actual 1800s architecture that hasn't been bulldozed for a condo development. Water Street runs along the bay with brick buildings housing oyster bars, antique shops, and art galleries that close when the owner feels like going fishing. The Rainy House dates to 1838. The Gibson Inn has been operating since 1907 and looks like it wandered out of a Wes Anderson film. Here's the pivot. Apalachicola Bay's oyster industry didn't just decline, it catastrophically collapsed. The Deepwater Horizon spill in 2010, followed by droughts and freshwater mismanagement, killed an industry that had existed for over a century. According to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, oyster harvests dropped from 3 million pounds in 2012 to effectively zero by 2020. Zero. An entire economy built on bivalves just stopped producing them. The bay reopened to limited harvesting in 2023, and the town is cautiously, almost superstitiously optimistic that its identity as the oyster capital of Florida might actually survive. But walk through downtown and you'll see the scars. Restaurants that switched to imported oysters, processing plants that closed, families that left the industry entirely. Median home prices sit around $285,000, according to Zillow, which gets you a historic Victorian with actual character in a waterfront town. That's less than a one-bedroom condo in Miami Beach costs, and this comes with a whole house attached. The trade-off? You're 65 miles from the nearest interstate. Your restaurant options close by 8 p.m. because the staff wants to go home, and your job prospects are limited to fishing, tourism, or commuting to Panama City. The cost of living runs about 12% below the Florida average, according to data from the Council for Community and Economic Research. Groceries are cheaper. Gas is comparable. Your entertainment budget drops to nearly zero because there's nothing to spend it on except fresh oysters at Boss Oyster and the occasional live music at a bar that doubles as a bait shop. Population has been essentially flat since 2010, hovering around 2,200 residents who have actively fought against becoming the next Seaside or Rosemary Beach. Tourism exists but remains seasonal and manageable. You won't find cruise ship crowds or bachelor parties. You'll find retirees, remote workers who discovered the place during the pandemic, and fourth-generation oystermen trying to resurrect a dying industry with their bare hands and stubborn optimism. A local business owner told us off the record, "We don't want to be discovered. Every town that gets discovered stops being the reason people discovered it in the first place. We've seen what happened to 30A. We'll stay broke and authentic. Thanks." Picture this. Late afternoon afternoon on Water Street, salt air mixing with the smell of steamed oysters, pelicans diving in the bay, the sunset turning the water pink and gold. Your biggest stress is whether to order a dozen raw or a dozen char grilled. Your mortgage costs less than parking in Orlando used to. Your town survived ecological collapse and is clawing its way back one oyster at a time. But if you thought Apalachicola felt remote at 2,200 people, we're just getting started. The population is about to drop by 2/3. Number 11. Cedar Key, the artist colony nobody found. From Apalachicola, we're cutting southeast about 150 miles to Florida's Big Bend, where the peninsula curves from Panhandle to proper peninsula. Cedar Key sits at the end of State Road 24, which is local code for you have to really want to get here. This is a Gulf Coast island connected by a 4-mile causeway, population 702 at last count, and it's barely budged since Jimmy Carter was president. The town exists on a series of small islands called Keys, though locals will correct you if you call them Keys with the Miami pronunciation. Up here, it's just Cedar Key, one phrase, like it's tired of explaining itself. Here's what nobody tells you. Cedar Key was almost Orlando. In the 1850s, this was Florida's second largest port. Pencil manufacturing boomed because of the native cedar trees. The railroad connected it to the rest of the state. Then the cedar ran out, the port business moved south, and a hurricane in 1896 essentially reset the town to zero. Cedar Key had its shot at being somebody and missed it by 130 years in one catastrophic storm. What's left is a community that missed the development boom entirely and has no interest in catching up. The artist colony vibe is real but understated. No galleries with security guards or champagne openings. We're talking painters selling watercolors from their front porches, sculptors working with driftwood they pulled from the Gulf that morning, musicians playing on dock bars because there's literally nowhere else to play. The town hosts an annual arts festival that draws maybe 5,000 people, which feels like Times Square compared to the usual vibe. Median home price hovers around $315,000 according to recent Redfin data, which gets you either a small elevated cottage built to survive storm surge or a larger, older home that absolutely will not survive the next category 3. Flood insurance is not optional. It's also not cheap. Budget an extra $2,000 to $5,000 annually, depending on your elevation and proximity to water, which is everywhere because you're on an island. Days on market average around 120 per the Levy County property appraiser, which tells you this isn't a hot market. It's a patient market. People don't impulse buy into Cedar Key. They visit 3 times, consider the trade-offs, rent for a season to test the isolation, then either commit completely or realize they're not actually ready to live somewhere the nearest Publix is 24 miles inland. The cost of living paradox hits hard here. Housing is affordable by Florida coastal standards. Everything else costs more because it has to be trucked across a causeway. Your grocery bill will be 15 to 20% higher than mainland Florida. Your dining options are limited to seafood shacks, a pizza place, and whatever the island hotel is serving that night. The coffee shop closes at 2 p.m., which is either charming or infuriating depending on your caffeine dependency and work schedule. Employment options are fishing, tourism, art, or remote work with internet that's better than you'd expect but worse than you need. The median household income sits around $38,000, according to census data, which works only because housing costs haven't spiraled into insanity yet, and people live simply by choice or necessity. A longtime resident summed it up perfectly. Cedar Key is for people who are done with people. If you need a mall, you're in the wrong place. If you need silence and low-key weirdness, you're home. We're the Florida that forgot to change since 1970, and we're keeping it that way. Picture this: morning on Dock Street, pelicans lined up on pilings like they're waiting for coffee that's never coming. The smell of fresh grouper from the market mixing with salt air. Artists setting up easels to paint the same dock they painted yesterday because the light's different and that matters here. Your commute is a golf cart ride. Your stress level is whether the tide's right for clamming. Your town peaked in 1850 and decided that was enough ambition for one lifetime. And if Cedar Key felt like stepping off the grid, we're dropping from 702 people to 544. The population countdown is just getting started. Number 10, Steenhatchee, the Scalloper's Secret. 25 miles north of Cedar Key, still clinging to Florida's Big Bend coast, sits Steinhatchee, population 544 on a good day, 0 stoplights, 1 main road, and a summer economy that revolves entirely around a mollusk most people can't even spell. Steinhatchee exists for one reason. The Steinhatchee River meets the Gulf of Mexico here, creating shallow grass flats perfect for bay scallops. From July through September, the population quadruples with scallopers who rent cottages, bring their boats, and spend their days snorkeling in 3 feet of water collecting their limit. Then they leave, and Steinhatchee goes back to being a fishing village that time forgot. Here's the economic reality. This is a seasonal town running a year-round overhead. The scallop season brings in enough tourism revenue to keep restaurants and hotels afloat. The rest of the year, it's fishing charters, stone crab season, and residents hoping their savings last until the scallopers return. According to the Taylor County Tax Collector's Office, property values have stayed relatively flat over the past decade, which is either stability or stagnation, depending on whether you're trying to sell or trying to stay. Median home prices hover around $245,000 per Zillow's limited data on a market this small. That gets you a riverfront cottage on stilts, or a concrete block home built to survive storm surge. Cheaper than a used Sprinter van conversion, and this comes with actual plumbing. The trade-off? You're 35 miles from the nearest grocery store in Perry, 70 miles from any significant shopping, and your internet options are satellite, cellular if the tower's cooperating, or prayer. The housing stock is dominated by short-term rentals. According to local real estate sources, roughly 60% of residential properties are investment rentals for scallop season. This creates a weird market dynamic where owner-occupied homes are actually available, but the community feels transient from July through September when your neighbors change weekly and the boat ramp looks like a Bass Pro Shop parking lot. Employment is fishing, guiding, or serving food to people who fish and guide. The median household income sits around $35,000, according to census estimates for this census designated place. Jobs that don't involve seafood or tourism basically don't exist. Remote work is your best bet if you can handle inconsistent connectivity and the knowledge that your neighbors will judge you for not fishing. The cost of living is low because there's nothing to spend money on. Your entertainment is catching your own dinner. Your social life is whoever's at the marina. The one tackle shop doubles as the community center. Roy's restaurant is the fine dining option, and it serves fried grouper on paper plates that taste better than anything you'll find in Tampa. A fishing guide told us, people move here thinking it's paradise. Then winter hits, the tourists leave, and they realize they're in a town of 500 people with one gas station and no movie theater. Some people love that. Most people last 6 months before they're posting their house on Zillow and their boat on Craigslist. Crime is basically non-existent because everyone knows everyone, and your boat is probably more valuable than your house anyway. The biggest public safety issue is tourists drowning themselves trying to scallop in areas with strong currents they didn't respect, or getting sunburned so badly they require medical evacuation. Picture this: dawn on the Steinhatchee River, mullet jumping, the smell of diesel and bait, fishing boats heading out past the rock pile to the Gulf. You're on your porch with coffee, watching ospreys hunt, knowing your biggest decision today is whether to fish the flats or the channels. Your mortgage costs less than a boat payment. Your neighbors are either fishing or thinking about fishing. Your grocery run is 35 miles each way, which you'll learn to accept or you won't last here. But if Steinhatchee required you to accept seasonal isolation and serious grocery logistics, the next town requires you to accept something weirder, living in a Dr. Seuss painting that survived a hurricane. And unlike Steinhatchee's scallop season, Matlacha's color palette never takes a vacation. Number 9. Matlacha, the Painted Island. We're jumping south now, leaving the Big Bend for Southwest Florida, but we're not going to the beaches everyone knows. We're heading to Pine Island, specifically to the tiny strip of land called Matlacha that connects Pine Island to the mainland. Pronounce it Matlachai, unless you want locals to know you just arrived yesterday. Matlacha is 1 mile long, maybe 300 yards wide at its widest point, and painted in colors that would make a pack of Skittles look understated. Every building is a different shade of turquoise, coral, lime green, electric purple, or colors that don't have official names because Sherwin-Williams gave up trying to catalog them. Art galleries occupy tin roof shacks. Restaurants are built on stilts over the water. The entire aesthetic is Florida if it were designed by someone who failed the color theory section of art school but succeeded spectacularly at life. This was a fishing village that became an artist colony by accident. Creative types priced out of Fort Myers and Cape Coral discovered cheap rent and good light in the 1980s. They started painting their shops in loud colors to stand out from each other. Other artists followed. Competition for visual attention escalated. Now it's a mile-long gallery where every building is screaming for attention, and somehow it works. Then Hurricane Ian hit in September 2022. Category 4 winds, 6 to 8 feet of storm surge. Matlacha, sitting barely above sea level, got obliterated. Buildings destroyed. The Causeway Bridge damaged. Power out for weeks. The island was cut off from the mainland for days. When the water receded, it looked like a watercolor painting that someone had left out in the rain. Here's what's remarkable. They rebuilt in the same ridiculous colors. The turquoise came back brighter. The purple came back louder. According to Lee County property records, roughly 40% of structures sustained major damage. Some were condemned, others were gutted and reconstructed. By early 2024, most businesses had reopened, though the scars are still visible if you know where to look. Newer concrete where old wood used to be. Foundations raised an extra 2 feet. Tie downs that weren't there before. Median home prices have actually increased post-Ian, sitting around $425,000 according to recent Zillow data. Not because the market is hot, but because what's left is either elevated, hurricane hardened, or new construction that meets current codes. Older affordable cottages either got destroyed or became teardowns. What remains is either cheap and risky or expensive and theoretically safer. Insurance is the hidden cost that murders affordability. If you can even get coverage, you're looking at $8,000 to $15,000 annually for flood and wind. That's more than most people's car payments, and it's just to insure a building that might get destroyed anyway. Some properties are effectively uninsurable at any price. Cash buyers dominate the market because lenders require insurance that doesn't exist or costs more than the mortgage itself. The cost of living is moderate by Southwest Florida standards, but high by rural Florida norms. You're close enough to Fort Myers for groceries and services, but far enough that you're commuting 30 to 40 minutes each way. Your dining options are seafood shacks and island bars. The art galleries are fun to browse, but you're not actually buying a $3,000 sculpture of a pelican made from reclaimed dockwood every week. Population data is murky because Matlacha isn't an incorporated town. It's a census-designated place within Pine Island. Best estimates put the year-round population around 800 pre-Ian, maybe 600 now. The community is aging, bohemian, and stubbornly committed to staying weird despite the economic pressure to sell out to developers who want to turn it into something more marketable and less interesting. A gallery owner told us, "We rebuilt in the same colors because if we're going to get destroyed every 20 years, we might as well enjoy the view between storms. Besides, painting your building seafoam green is cheaper than therapy and more effective." Employment is art, fishing, tourism, or commuting to the mainland. Remote work is possible with decent internet, which returned faster than some necessities post-Ian because Lee County prioritized connectivity. The local economy runs on winter tourists who drive over from Fort Myers, buy some art, eat some grouper, take 47 photos for Instagram, and leave. Picture this: sunset on Matlacha, the Causeway Bridge reflecting in pink and orange water, tin roofs painted lime green and electric blue glowing in the last light, the smell of fried fish mixing with turpentine from an open studio, mullet jumping in the canal. You're sitting on a deck built over the water, watching boats return from the Gulf, knowing tomorrow you might paint this exact scene, or you might just fish. Your insurance costs more than your mortgage. Your neighbors are either artists or fishermen, sometimes both. Your town got destroyed and came back louder. That's either inspiring or insane, depending on your relationship with risk. And if Matlacha required you to accept hurricane risk for quirky charm, the next town requires you to accept leaving the modern world entirely for something even stranger. We're going inland for the first time to a place where the biggest controversy in recent memory was whether to pave the roads. They voted no. Number 8. My Canopy, the time capsule town. We're cutting inland now, leaving the coast entirely for the first time. About 90 miles due north of Matlacha, just south of Gainesville, sits Canopy. Population 600, established 1821, making it one of the oldest inland towns in Florida. And it has fought tooth and nail to stay exactly as it was in 1880, which is either admirable preservation or economic stagnation, depending on whether you're a historian or a real estate developer. This is not a restored ignored historic district. This is a town that never modernized in the first place. Cholaca Boulevard, the main street, is lined with live oaks draped in Spanish moss, brick buildings with wooden awnings, and antique shops occupying storefronts that have never been anything else. No chains, no franchises. The closest thing to corporate America is the post office, and even that looks like it's from a different century. The entire downtown is on the National Register of Historic Places, which sounds impressive until you realize it also means you can't change anything without navigating historic preservation regulations that treat your paint color like a constitutional amendment. Want to replace your windows? Better make sure they match the 1890 originals. Want to add a dormer? The Architectural Review Board would like a word, and that word is no. One resident tried to install solar panels, and the resulting controversy lasted longer than some wars. Here's the economic reality. Mechanipe exists as a bedroom community for Gainesville, and a weekend destination for antique hunters who drive down from Jacksonville or up from Tampa. It doesn't have its own economic engine. According to Alachua County economic data, the town has no major employers, no industrial base, and no real commercial activity beyond retail shops aimed at tourists and University of Florida professors looking for Victorian sideboards and a vibe check. Median home prices hover around $320,000 per Zillow data, which gets you either a historic home requiring constant maintenance and Architectural Review Board approval for every repair, or a newer house on the outskirts that defeats the entire purpose of living in Mechanipe. The trade-off is clear. You're buying aesthetic and walkability, not practicality or investment potential. You're buying a lifestyle that peaked in 1890 and never saw a reason to update. Days on market average around 90, which is reasonable but not competitive. This isn't a hot market, it's a niche market for a specific type of person. You either desperately want to live in a 19th century time capsule where your biggest modern convenience is indoor plumbing, or you buy literally anywhere else in North Florida where you can install the windows you want without a hearing. The cost of living is slightly below Florida's average, primarily because Gainesville is 11 miles north with normal grocery stores, gas stations, and services that don't close at 4 p.m. Mechanipe itself has one cafe, one coffee shop that stops serving at 2 p.m. because apparently caffeine after lunch is too modern, and approximately zero practical amenities. You're commuting to Gainesville for everything from milk to medical care to the ability to buy something made after 1950. Employment options are antiques, hospitality, or commuting. The median household income sits around $42,000 according to census estimates, which works only because cost of living is relatively low and most working residents commute to Gainesville for actual jobs with benefits and paychecks that don't depend on tourists wanting to buy vintage typewriters. The town's charm is undeniable and deeply fragile. It depends on nothing changing, which means nothing can grow. Population has been essentially flat since the 1980s. New development is restricted by preservation laws and community resistance. The community is aging. Younger residents move to Gainesville where jobs and nightlife exist, and you can renovate your bathroom without submitting an environmental impact statement. A longtime resident put it plainly. Mechanipe is perfect if you're retired, work remotely, or teach at UF and want to pretend you live in the past. If you need a career here, you're out of luck. The whole point is that we're not here, we're then, and we're staying then. Crime is nearly non-existent. The biggest public safety issue is tourists blocking traffic to photograph the oak trees or trying to pet the town's semi-feral cats. The local police department has 2 officers who mostly direct lost tourists back to I-75. The fire department is volunteer and hasn't had a major call in years because the whole town is terrified of burning down their irreplaceable historic buildings. Picture this: Saturday morning on Cholaca Boulevard, Spanish moss swaying in the breeze, the smell of coffee from the cafe mixing with old books and furniture wax from the antique shops. You're walking to the farmer's market under live oaks that were here before Florida was a state. Your pace is slow because rushing would violate the aesthetic. Your phone has reception, but you're not checking it because that feels anachronistic. Your commute is 20 minutes to Gainesville or 0 if you work from home. Your town hasn't changed in 140 years and has no plans to start now. Your neighbors will fight you if you try to install vinyl siding, but if Mechanipe asked you to accept living in the past, the next town asks you to accept something genuinely weird. Your neighbors might be psychic, your streets are dirt, and the whole place runs on spiritual tourism and vibes that may or may not be coming from the other side. 7. Casa Daga, the spiritualist camp. 30 miles northeast of Orlando, just off I-4 in Volusia County, sits Casadaga, population 100, founded in 1894, and every single resident is either a certified medium, a spiritualist, or someone who moved here because their dead grandmother told them to. That's not a metaphor, that's actually how some people explain their arrival. This is not a quirky town with a few psychics. Casadaga is a spiritualist camp, one of the oldest active religious communities in the United States. The Southern Casadaga Spiritualist Camp Meeting Association owns the land. To live here permanently, you have to be a dues-paying member of the association. To be a member, you generally need to be a practicing spiritualist. The whole town is essentially a gated community for people who talk to the dead professionally and don't find that sentence strange. The streets are unpaved. Dirt roads wind through canopy oaks like the town forgot to join the 20th century, let alone the 21st. Victorian homes with wraparound porches serve as both residences and reading rooms where mediums conduct sessions for clients seeking contact with deceased relatives, spirit guides, or answers to questions the living can't provide. The Casadaga Hotel, built in 1927, operates as the social center. The bookstore sells crystals, tarot decks, and books on astral projection. Sunday services at the Colby Memorial Temple include hymns, meditation, and messages from the other side delivered by rotating mediums. Here's the economic model: spiritual tourism. People drive from Orlando, Tampa, Jacksonville, and sometimes much farther for psychic readings, aura photography, past life regression sessions, and healing circles. Sessions run $50 to $150 depending on the medium's reputation and whether you're doing a basic reading or something more involved, like contacting your great-great-grandfather to ask about buried family money. The town survives on this cottage industry of grief counseling disguised as supernatural contact, or supernatural contact disguised as grief counseling depending on your beliefs. Housing is complicated because you can't just buy a house in Casadaga like a normal real estate transaction. You have to be approved by the association, which means demonstrating commitment to spiritualist principles. According to local real estate sources, the few properties that come available sell for $180,000 to $350,000, less than a basic condo in Orlando. And this comes with a whole house and a community of people who won't judge you for talking to your spirit guides at the grocery store. But the buyer pool is limited to people willing to join a religious community devoted to mediumship and the belief that death is just a relocation to a different plane of existence. Rental options exist for non-members, but they're seasonal and geared toward visiting mediums or spiritual seekers doing intensive study. Long-term rentals for regular people who just want affordable housing near Orlando are essentially non-existent. You're not moving to Casadaga for the commute. You're moving here because you believe, or because the veil between worlds genuinely feels thinner here. The cost of living is low because there's nothing to buy. No restaurants beyond the hotel dining room, no shops beyond the bookstore, and a few metaphysical supply stores selling sage and selenite. Your groceries come from Deland, 5 miles west. Your entertainment is talking to dead people or watching other people talk to dead people, which is either fascinating or boring depending on your tolerance for the metaphysical. Employment options are medium, hotel staff, bookstore clerk, or commuting to DeLand or Orlando for normal jobs that don't involve channeling spirits. The median income data is unreliable given the small population and unusual economic structure, but it's safe to assume most residents earn below Florida's median given the nature of the work and the fact that talking to the dead pays less than most people expect. The community is intensely insular, but surprisingly welcoming if you're genuinely interested in spiritualism, or at least respectful of it. Skeptics are tolerated as long as they're polite. Scoffers are shown the door. Debunkers are asked to leave and not come back. The vibe is less cult and more intentional community that happens to believe the veil between worlds is thinner here, and that your deceased loved ones are only a medium away. A medium who's lived here for 30 years told us, "People think we're strange. We are strange. But we're also the least judgmental town you'll ever find because everyone here has been judged their whole lives for what they do. You want to talk to your dead cat? Nobody here will blink. You want to install vinyl siding? Now we have a problem. Crime is functionally zero. The biggest controversy in recent years was whether to pave the roads, which was soundly rejected because paved roads would ruin the aesthetic, attract the wrong kind of visitor, and possibly disturb the energy of the place. The dirt roads stay. The spirits apparently prefer it that way. Picture this. this, twilight in Casadaga, candles glowing in Victorian windows, the sound of wind chimes and distant conversation from a porch reading, Spanish moss hanging from oaks like curtains between worlds. You're walking dirt streets that haven't changed in a century, knowing your neighbor is currently channeling someone's great-grandfather in the house you just passed. Your rent is cheap, your commute is short if you work in DeLand, your social life requires either belief in the spirit world or a really high tolerance for people who do. Your town has 100 people and they all talk to the dead. That's either exactly what you've been looking for or your signal to keep driving. Apalachicola asked you to accept isolation from interstates. Cedar Key asked you to accept isolation on an island. Mechanipe asked you to accept isolation from the modern era. Casadaga asked you to accept isolation from material reality itself. And if talking to the dead felt like a bridge too far, the next stop requires something more fundamental, accepting that you live at the end of the road, literally where the Everglades begin and civilization ends. Number 6. Chokoloskee, the Everglades Outpost. We're jumping south now, all the way to the tip of southwest Florida where the 10,000 islands meet the Everglades. Chokoloskee sits on an island accessed by a 3-mile causeway from Everglades City. Population 400, 0 stoplights, 1 road in, same road out. And if you're here, you either fish, guide fishermen, retired from fishing, or you're about to learn why everyone else does those things. This is old Florida in its purest, most unfiltered form. Not the sanitized version you find in tourist brochures or state park visitor centers. The actual frontier version where people still hunt alligators, run stone crab traps in the winter, and live in houses built on shell mounds that Calusa Indians created 1,000 years ago because they understood something about elevation that modern developers have forgotten. The island itself is an ancient shell mound, raised maybe 20 feet above sea level, which is the only reason it exists at all and hasn't been reclaimed by the mangroves. Chokoloskee's history is equal parts pioneer spirit and outlaw legend. This was where bootleggers, poachers, and people running from the law disappeared into the Everglades in the early 1900s because the law couldn't follow them into the backcountry. The murder of Ed Watson in 1910, a suspected serial killer gunned down by locals on the Chokoloskee dock after one murder too many, still defines the island's mythology. The isolation that once made it a haven for criminals now makes it a haven for people who just want to be left alone and don't mind mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds. Here's the infrastructure reality. 1 small grocery store that's more of a bait shop with canned goods and a prayer. 1 restaurant, 1 post office, 0 gas stations. You fuel up in Everglades City before crossing the causeway, or you learn to keep jerry cans in your boat. Your internet is satellite or cellular, neither reliable. Your water comes from a well or rainwater cistern. Your power goes out during storms and stays out for days because you're at the absolute end of the grid and Florida Power and Light fixes Miami before they fix you. According to Collier County property records, median home prices hover around $380,000, which sounds insane until you realize that's for waterfront property with dock access in one of the most remote locations in Florida. The trade-off? You're 40 miles from Naples, 90 miles from Fort Myers, and your hurricane evacuation route is a single 2-lane causeway that floods in heavy rain, let alone during a storm surge. Days on market average over 150 per Redfin data because the buyer pool for this lifestyle is microscopic and self-selecting. You're not buying a house in Chokoloskee, you're buying into a specific kind of existence that requires boats, plural, tolerance for mosquitoes that will drain you like a juice box, and acceptance that running to the store means a 40-mile round trip or just doing without until your next supply run. The cost of living paradox is brutal here. Housing is expensive for what you get. Everything else costs more because it has to be trucked in. Groceries are 20 to 30% higher than mainland Florida. Your boat is not optional, it's your second vehicle and possibly more important than your truck. Fuel costs add up when your fishing grounds are 10 miles offshore and you're running out there 3 times a week because that's what you do here. Remember Mechanipe's One Cafe? That felt cosmopolitan compared to this. Cedar Key's limited dining options. Those were the good old days. Chokoloskee has 1 restaurant and it's open when it's open. Employment is fishing, guiding, or nothing. The median household income sits around $45,000 according to census estimates, which works only because people live simply and most major expenses are boats, fuel, and tackle. Not consumer goods you can't buy here anyway. Remote work is theoretically possible but unrealistic given connectivity issues and the fact that your lifestyle Carabel will revolve around tides and weather, not Zoom meetings and deadlines. The community is tight because it has to be. Everyone knows everyone. Your neighbor will help you pull your boat after a storm. They'll also know if you forgot to tie it down properly in the first place and will judge you accordingly. Privacy exists in the physical sense. Your nearest neighbor might be 200 yards away, but social privacy is impossible in a town of 400 where everyone's business is everyone's business. A third-generation resident told us, "My grandfather moved here to get away from people. I stay here for the same reason. If you need shopping malls, you're in the wrong place. If you need the Everglades in your backyard and silence that actually means something, you're home. Just know that home comes with bugs, heat, and the knowledge that you're living somewhere most people couldn't survive a week." Flooding is not a question of if, but when and how bad. Hurricane Irma in 2017 put the entire island underwater. The causeway was impassable for days. Some residents evacuated. Others rode it out in their attics with their guns, their documents, and their stubbornness. The rebuilding was slow because contractors don't want to drive 40 miles to a job site that requires a boat to access half the properties and where building materials have to be barged in. Picture this: dawn on Chokoloskee, mullet jumping in the channels, the smell of salt and mangroves. You're on your dock watching the sun rise over the 10,000 islands, knowing the only sounds today will be your boat motor, ospreys, and maybe another fisherman on the VHF radio checking in. Your closest neighbor is 200 yards away, but you might not see them for days. Your mortgage costs more than your boat payment, which is saying something when your boat costs $40,000. Your life runs on tides, weather, and fish patterns, not schedules or meetings. Your grocery store is a bait shop. Your town is 400 people who chose this on purpose. But if Chokoloskee required serious commitment to isolation, at least it has neighbors and a grocery store that sells more than just tackle. The next town makes Chokoloskee look like a thriving metropolis with amenities and infrastructure. We're about to drop below 3,000 people total, then below 1,000, and it's going to keep falling from there. Number 5. Carabel, the forgotten panhandle. Back to the panhandle now, about 30 miles east of Apalachicola, where we started this journey. Carabel sits on the Gulf at the mouth of the Carabel River, population 2,600, and it has the unfortunate distinction of being the town that Florida forgot to develop, that developers forgot to exploit, and that progress forgot to include. This is a working waterfront that never became a tourist destination. Commercial fishing docks, fish processing plants running at half capacity, and a working marina dominate the downtown. The town's most famous landmark is the world's smallest police station, a phone booth that's now a museum because even Carabel doesn't need a phone booth anymore. That's what passes for tourist attraction here, a decommissioned phone booth. Here's the economic story. Carabel was supposed to be a deep water port. Rail lines were built. Infrastructure was planned. Money was allocated. Then nothing happened. Panama City developed instead. Apalachicola kept the oyster industry. Carabel was left with potential that never materialized. Infrastructure that's slowly crumbling, and a population wondering what happened to the prosperity that was supposed to arrive with the railroad. According to Franklin County economic data, commercial fishing is still the primary industry, but it's a shadow of what it was. The fleet is smaller, the processing plants are struggling, the jobs that remain pay low wages for hard work that's getting harder as regulations tighten and fish stocks fluctuate. The median household income sits around $32,000, which is well below Florida's median and reflects an economy that never transitioned beyond resource extraction and never found anything to replace it. Median home prices hover around $215,000 per Zillow data, which makes Carabel one of the most affordable waterfront communities in Florida, cheaper than a used Airstream, and this comes with foundations and walls. The catch: the homes are aging, the infrastructure is dated, and the job market offers almost nothing unless you fish or commute to Tallahassee, which is 50 miles northeast and absolutely not a realistic daily commute unless you really hate yourself. Days on market average around 110, which suggests modest interest from retirees and remote workers, but nothing approaching a boom or even sustained growth. The housing stock is a mix of old Florida concrete block homes, newer modular builds, and waterfront cottages that need constant maintenance from salt air and storms that hit this unprotected coast regularly. The cost of living is low because wages are low and amenities are limited. You have basic services, a Piggly Wiggly Deli for groceries, a Dollar General for everything else, some local restaurants that may or may not be open depending on the season and the owner's mood and whether the fish are running. Your dining options are fried seafood or fried seafood served on different plates with different tartar sauce. Employment beyond fishing is limited to service jobs supporting the small tourism trade, seasonal work at Tate's Hell State Forest nearby, or commuting to Tallahassee for actual careers with benefits and advancement opportunities. Remote work is your best bet if you can handle rural internet that's improved but still cuts out during storms, or sometimes just because. The town has tried to rebrand around ecotourism and the Forgotten Coast marketing push that includes Apalachicola and Port St. Joe. It hasn't worked. The beaches are fine, but unremarkable. The fishing is good, but competitive. The culture is authentic, but depressed. Carabel remains what it's always been, a struggling fishing village with great bones, decent people, and no clear path forward beyond hoping retirees keep discovering it. Crime rates are moderate, slightly above Florida's average, according to FBI data, which mostly reflects drug issues common in economically depressed coastal areas, and property crime from people struggling financially. Violent crime is rare but not absent. The police department is small and stretched. A local business owner told us off the record, "We're affordable because nobody wants to live here. We're authentic because we can't afford to be anything else." If you come here expecting charm, you'll find it. If you come here expecting jobs or investment potential, you're going to be disappointed. This town peaked in 1920 and has been coasting on fumes ever since. Hurricane risk is constant. Carabel sits at sea level. Storm surge from any major hurricane puts the downtown underwater. Hurricane Michael in 2018 caused significant damage, even though it made landfall 30 miles east. The recovery was slow. Some businesses never reopened. The ones that did are one storm away from not reopening next time. Picture this. Afternoon on the Carabel waterfront, shrimp boats tied to docks. The smell of diesel and fresh catch and salt air. Pelicans perched on pilings. You're watching fishermen unload their haul, knowing this scene hasn't changed in 50 years, except the boats are older and there are fewer of them. Your mortgage is cheap, your job prospects are limited, your town is hanging on by reputation and stubbornness, not by any economic logic that makes sense in 2026. Apalachicola's oyster industry collapsed and came back. Cedar Key's economy sputtered but survived on art and tourism. Carabel's economy collapsed and just stayed there. And if that felt depressing, the next town shows you what happens when you don't even have an economy to collapse. Just nature, springs, and the kind of isolation that makes Carabel look connected. Number 4. Yankeetown, the spring-fed hideaway. We're back to the nature coast, that forgotten stretch of Gulf shoreline between the Big Bend and the Tampa Bay sprawl. Yankeetown sits where the Withlacoochee River meets the Gulf, population 500, and it exists primarily as a jumping-off point for people who want to kayak, fish, or disappear into springs that look like they were designed by a nature documentary crew on an unlimited budget. This is not a developed waterfront. There's no downtown, no main street, no historic district, just scattered homes along the river, a couple of fish camps that open when they feel like it, one small marina, and the Withlacoochee Gulf Preserve, 413 acres of coastal habitat that ensures nothing around here will ever be developed, which is either excellent conservation or economic suicide depending on whether you're an environmentalist or a real estate agent. The town's claim to fame is being near the Crystal River and Homosassa areas, where manatees gather in winter and tourists pay good money to swim with them. Yankeetown itself has none of that infrastructure. It's where locals go when they're tired of the tourists in Crystal River. It's the unfiltered version, the director's cut, the Florida that forgot to monetize itself. Here's the infrastructure situation. No grocery store. The nearest full-service supermarket is in Chiefland, 40 miles inland through winding rural roads. No restaurants beyond a couple of fish camps that open when they feel like it and serve whatever the owner caught that morning. No gas station in Yankeetown proper. Your internet is satellite, cellular if you're lucky, and the tower's having a good day. Dial up if you're nostalgic and patient. According to Levy County property records, median home prices sit around $260,000, which gets you either riverfront property with a dock or a landlocked home in the scrub, where your view is sand pines and palmetto and the occasional deer wondering what you're doing here. The waterfront premium is real. The trade-off is infrastructure that's essentially optional and services that are more theoretical than actual. Days on market average over 180 per limited Redfin data. Because the buyer pool is minuscule and and highly specific. You're buying into a lifestyle that requires self-sufficiency. You're not just off the beaten path. You're in a place where the path was never beaten in the first place, where Google Maps gives directions with a tone of concern. The cost of living is low in theory, brutal in practice. Housing is affordable. Everything else requires driving significant distances, groceries, medical care, auto parts, a decent meal. The time and fuel costs add up fast. You're saving on housing but spending on logistics and isolation. Employment options are non-existent locally. You fish, you guide, you work remotely, or you commute to Crystal River, Inverness, or Ocala, all of which are 30 to 50 miles away. The median household income data is unreliable given the tiny population, but it's safe to assume well below average earnings unless you're retired with a pension or remote with a good income. The natural environment is legitimately spectacular if you're into water-based activities. The Withlacoochee River is spring-fed, crystal clear, and full of manatees, mullet, and redfish. The Gulf access is shallow and perfect for kayaking through mangrove tunnels and oyster bars. If your recreation involves being on or in water, you're in the right place. If your recreation involves literally anything else, you're driving 30 plus miles to find it. The community is sparse and self-selected. Everyone here chose isolation deliberately. Your neighbors are either serious anglers, retirees seeking solitude, or people who burned out on society and decided to live somewhere that society forgot to include on the development maps. A longtime resident put it simply: Yankeetown is for people who want to be left alone and are willing to give up convenience for it. If you need a target, go to Ocala. If you need quiet and manatees in your backyard, stay here. Just know that your backyard is pretty much all you're getting. Hurricane risk is moderate. The area doesn't take direct hits often, but storm surge and river flooding are real concerns. Hurricane Idalia in 2023 caused flooding and power outages that lasted over a week in some areas. When you're this remote, restoration crews get to you last because there are only 500 of you and there are cities with actual tax bases waiting. Picture this: morning on the Withlacoochee, glass calm water reflecting cypress trees, manatees surfacing in the channels like they're checking if you're still there. The only sounds are ospreys, your paddle in the water, and maybe a boat motor in the distance. You launch from your backyard dock, knowing you won't see another person for hours unless you want to. Your mortgage is cheap, your commute is zero if you work remotely. Your town has a post office and basically nothing else. And that's exactly why you're here. Your nearest full-service grocery store is 40 miles away. You've made peace with that math or you wouldn't last here. But if Yankeetown asked you to give up convenience for nature, the next town asks you to give up safety for the same privilege. Because sometimes paradise comes with a storm surge warning and a history of getting destroyed on a schedule so regular you could set your watch by it. 3. Horseshoe Beach, the hurricane magnet. We're staying on the nature coast, dropping south about 30 miles from Yankeetown to a place that might not survive the next decade without federal disaster money and the stubbornness of people who refuse to accept basic meteorology. Horseshoe Beach, population 169 at last count, sits on the Gulf at the end of County Road 351. It's a fishing camp that became a town, or maybe it's a town pretending to be a fishing camp. The distinction doesn't matter much when you're rebuilding from the third major hurricane in 20 years. This is Florida at its most vulnerable. No elevation, no barrier islands, no natural protection from Gulf storms. Just a low-lying peninsula jutting into the water like it's daring hurricanes to take their best shot. And they do, regularly, with increasing frequency and intensity. Hurricane Idalia hit here in August 2023 as a Category 3, storm surge up to 8 feet, which means water higher than most first floors. Homes destroyed. The tiny downtown flooded. Power out for weeks. Before that, Hurricane Hermine in 2016 caused extensive flooding and wind damage. Before that, the no-name storm of 1993 that wasn't even named because we didn't have enough letters yet. The community rebuilds every time, but each rebuilding is slower, more expensive, and less complete than the last. Here's what nobody tells you about Horseshoe Beach. It's economically impossible to save. The tax base is 169 people. The infrastructure needs are enormous. FEMA money helps after disasters, but it doesn't cover everything and it's not infinite. Insurance companies have either left entirely or raised rates so high that coverage becomes purely theoretical, a checkbox on a form that leads nowhere. According to Dixie County property records, median home values sit around $180,000, which sounds affordable until you factor in that insurance, if you can get it, runs $10,000 to $20,000 annually for flood and wind. That's more than most people's annual vacation budgets, and it's just to ensure a building that statistically will be damaged or destroyed within the next decade. Many properties are cash-only transactions because lenders won't touch uninsurable coastal real estate in active hurricane zones where the question isn't if, but when. Remember Matlaka's brutal insurance costs post-Ian? Horseshoe Beach residents look at those numbers and think, must be nice to only rebuild once every decade. Days on market vary wildly. Post-storm, properties sit for 200 plus days because nobody's buying into a disaster area that still smells like mold and FEMA trailers. Between storms, you get bargain hunters and people who either don't understand the risk, have accepted it as the price of waterfront access, or are planning to flip it to the next person before the next storm hits. The cost of living is low for housing, but catastrophic for insurance and maintenance. Your property will be damaged. Not might be, will be. Budget for constant repairs, roof replacements every 5 to 7 years instead of 20, dock rebuilding, and the knowledge that a single storm can wipe out years of investment and equity in one afternoon of wind and water. Employment is fishing, fish camp services, or remote work if your internet survives. The median income is below $30,000 for the few year-round residents who report income. Most people here are retirees living on fixed incomes, accepting hurricane risk because they can't afford safer coastal areas where insurance is merely expensive instead of impossible. The community is stubborn, resilient, and shrinking. Population has declined slowly but steadily. Younger families don't move here, they leave. The demographics skew older, less mobile, and more attached to a place that's geographically doomed by rising sea levels and increasing storm intensity. A fish camp owner told us after Adalia, "We rebuild because it's what we do. We know another storm is coming. We just don't know when. Some people call that stupid. We call it home. Some people call it denial. We call it Tuesday. You either understand why we stay or you don't. No amount of explaining will make it make sense to people who don't already get it." The natural environment is pristine. The fishing is exceptional. Redfish, trout, scallops in season, stone crab in winter. The Gulf sunsets are spectacular. The night sky is unpolluted by light or ambition. If you can accept the existential threat hanging over every decision you make, every dollar you invest, every repair you complete, it's genuinely beautiful. Crime is essentially zero. The biggest threat is nature, not people. The community is too small and isolated for significant crime. Everyone knows everyone. Your boat is safe from theft. Your house will be destroyed by weather, not burglary. Your biggest enemy is atmospheric pressure and water temperature in the Gulf. Picture this. Sunset at Horseshoe Beach, the Gulf turning pink and gold, mullet jumping, a great blue heron stalking the shallows like it owns the place, which it does more than you do. You're on your rebuilt dock, knowing this exact dock has been destroyed and rebuilt 3 times in 15 years. Your beer is cold. Your mortgage is paid off because no bank would touch this property with a 10-foot pole. Your insurance costs more annually than your property taxes, utilities, and groceries combined. You're living in paradise on borrowed time, and you've made peace with that math. You know the storm is coming. You just hope it's not this year. But if Horseshoe Beach asked you to accept hurricane risk, the next 2 towns ask you to accept something even more fundamental. Isolation so complete that your town barely qualifies as a town, and infrastructure so limited that roughing it isn't an adventure. It's your daily baseline. Number 2, Sopchoppy, the worm grunting capital, back to the Panhandle, about 20 miles southwest of Tallahassee, deep in the Apalachicola National Forest. Sopchoppy, population 464, exists at the intersection of why would anyone live here and why would anyone leave? It's a philosophical question that the town itself seems unable to answer. This is a forest town that forgot to connect to the modern world. The town sits on the Sopchoppy River, surrounded by longleaf pine forests that stretches for miles in every direction, and its main claim to fame is the annual Worm Gruntin' Festival, which celebrates the local practice of driving wooden stakes into the ground and rubbing them with metal to create vibrations that bring earthworms to the surface. Yes, that's a real thing. Yes, it's been happening here for over 100 years. Yes, there's a festival about it. No, it doesn't make sense unless you're selling worms to fishermen, which is actually a legitimate side hustle here. The technique involves rubbing a metal rod across a wooden stake driven into the ground, creating vibrations vibrations that mimic mole digging sounds, which panics the earthworms into surfacing where they can be collected and sold. It's part folk tradition, part economic necessity, and entirely unique to this region of Florida. The festival includes worm grunting demonstrations, live music, and a parade that features maybe 12 floats. It's the most exciting thing that happens here all year. The downtown is 4 blocks of old storefronts, most vacant. The Sopchoppy Depot, a restored 1920s train station, serves as a museum and community center. The town has 1 gas station, 1 convenience store, and a couple of restaurants that open sporadically based on whether the owners feel like cooking that day. Your grocery shopping happens in Crawfordville, 20 miles east, or Tallahassee if you want actual selection beyond canned goods and hope. Here's the population trajectory. Sopchoppy peaked around 500 residents in the 1980s and has been slowly declining since. According to census data, the median age is over 50 and rising. Younger people leave for jobs, education, or literally any opportunity that isn't tied to forestry, worm harvesting, or serving the 3 tourists who pass through monthly. Median home prices hover around $175,000 per Zillow's sparse data on a market this small, which makes Sopchoppy one of the most affordable towns in North Florida, cheaper than a year of college tuition, and this comes with a whole house. The trade-off: you're buying into a dying economy in an isolated location with almost no services and no clear future beyond continue existing until we don't. Days on market average over 200 because the buyer pool consists of people seeking extreme rural isolation, retirees on tight budgets, or remote workers who romanticize forest living until the first time their internet cuts out for 3 days, and they realize the nearest tech support is 20 miles away and not particularly interested in rushing over. The cost of living is rock bottom for housing, moderate for everything else because of distance. Your property taxes are low, your utilities are cheap, your time and fuel costs for basic errands add up quickly when the nearest real grocery store is 20 miles and the nearest hospital is 30 miles in Tallahassee, and you're making that drive for everything from milk to medical emergencies. Employment options are forestry, which is declining as automation increases, small business, which is struggling as the population shrinks, or remote work, which is possible but complicated by rural internet infrastructure that considers 10 megabits per second download speeds a good day. The median household income sits around $28,000, according to census estimates, which is survivable only because housing and cost of living are so low and people live simply by choice or necessity. The Apalachicola National Forest is the draw if you're into hunting, fishing, hiking, or just wanting to be surrounded by longleaf pines and silence that actually means silence, not traffic is quiet today. The Sopchoppy River offers kayaking and canoeing through Blackwater Swamp that looks primordial, like something from before humans arrived and after they leave. Wildlife is abundant. People are scarce. Cell service is a rumor. Casadaga has psychic readings for entertainment. Sopchoppy has trees. The Bar for Excitement has officially left the building and taken the building with it. The community is small, aging, and friendly in that rural way where everyone knows everyone's business and privacy is a theoretical concept discussed in cities but not practiced here. Your neighbors will help you when you need it, mostly because there's nobody else to call and mutual aid is survival strategy, not political philosophy. A longtime resident told us, Sopchoppy is where you move when you're done with people, noise, and rushing. If you need entertainment, you're in the wrong place. If you need peace and the kind of quiet that makes you uncomfortable until you get used to it, you're home. Just don't expect anyone to deliver pizza. We're not sure pizza delivery drivers know we exist. Crime is virtually non-existent. The biggest public safety issue is wildlife encounters. Bears, wild hogs, the occasional panther, and people getting lost in the national forest because they underestimated how big it is and how similar all the dirt roads look. The local police department is tiny. Response times for emergencies can be slow simply because everything is far from everything else, and there are only 2 officers. Infrastructure is basic. Roads are maintained but rural. Internet is satellite, DSL in some areas, or cellular if you're lucky and standing in the right spot. Power outages during storms can last days because the utility crews prioritize areas with more than 464 people. Self-sufficiency efficiency isn't optional, it's survival. You learn to keep supplies, fix things yourself, and not depend on services arriving quickly. Picture this: morning in Sopchoppy, fog rising from the river, the sound of woodpeckers echoing through pine forest. You're on your porch with coffee, watching deer cross your yard, knowing your nearest neighbor is a quarter-mile away, and you might not see another person all day unless you drive to town, which consists of driving past the gas station and waving. Your mortgage is cheaper than most people's car payments. Your commute is zero if you work remotely, impossible if you don't. Your town holds a festival celebrating earthworm harvesting because that's the most exciting thing that happens here all year. You've accepted this. And if Sopchoppy represented rural isolation in forest country, the final stop represents something even more extreme. Isolation so complete that your entire town fits in a post office smaller than most people's bathrooms. We started at 2,200 people. We're ending at roughly 100, and those 100 people share a building the size of a garden shed. 1. Ochopi, the one-building town. We're ending this journey in the Everglades, on the Tamiami Trail about 35 miles west of Miami, 50 miles east of Naples. We started in Apalachicola, population 2,200, which felt small. We dropped to Cedar Keys 702, then Steinhatchee's 544, Casadaga's 100 people living in a spiritualist camp. And now we're ending in Ochopi, population approximately 100, where the entire town is less a place and more a conceptual statement about how little infrastructure you actually need to exist on a map. Casadaga has 100 people and a whole spiritualist community with Victorian homes and dirt roads. Ochopi has roughly 100 people scattered across swampland and one building that defines everything. The difference? Casadaga at least has a community. Ochopi has a shed with a flag. The entire identity of Ochopi rests on one claim to fame: the smallest post office in the United States. It's 8 feet by 7 feet, 56 square feet, which is smaller than most people's walk-in closets. It's a former irrigation pipe shed that became the post office in 1953 after the original burned down. The Postal Service decided that rebuilding a full-size post office for 100 people in the middle of the Everglades didn't make economic sense, so they repurposed a shed. It's still operating, it still delivers mail, it's still tiny, and it's pretty much the only reason anyone stops here. Carabel complained about limited services. Sopchoppy has one gas station. Ochopi's municipal infrastructure fits in a shed that's smaller than McCanopy's antique shop bathrooms. This is deep Everglades country. The landscape is sawgrass, cypress domes, and water as far as you can see. The Tamiami Trail runs straight through what is essentially wilderness with a speed limit and occasional signs warning about panthers. There's no town center because there's no town, just scattered homes, the post office, a convenience store that doubles as a skunk ape research headquarters because Florida is nothing if not committed to cryptozoology and tourist traps based on blurry photos and whole lot of swamp. The population is fluid and hard to pin down. Census data lists Ochopi as a census-designated place with around 100 residents, but that includes a large geographic area. The actual concentration of people near the post office is maybe 20 homes. Employment is National Park Service jobs at Big Cypress, Miccosukee tribal operations, airboat tour companies, or working remotely with satellite internet that works when it wants to and takes vacations during storms. Here's the real estate situation. Properties rarely come on the market. When they do, prices range wildly from $150,000 for a basic concrete block home to $400,000 plus for anything waterfront or connected to airboat tour operations. The market is so thin that median prices are essentially meaningless. It's whatever the one seller and one buyer agree on in any given year. What you're buying is access to the Everglades, isolation from civilization, and a lifestyle that requires acceptance of floods, heat that makes summer feel like a punishment, mosquitoes that operate in coordinated squadrons, and the knowledge that your nearest hospital is over an hour away in either direction. Your neighbors include alligators, panthers, and the occasional lost tourist who thought the Tamiami Trail would be more scenic and less terrifying than it actually is. The cost of living is paradoxical. Housing is variable. Services are non-existent locally. You're driving to Naples or Miami for groceries, medical care, or anything beyond gas and convenience store snacks that expired 6 months ago. The Miccosukee Casino offers some employment and entertainment, but it's not exactly urban amenities or career advancement advancement opportunities. Infrastructure is minimal. Power is above ground and vulnerable to storms. Water is well or cistern. Septic systems are standard because sewer lines aren't happening out here. Internet is satellite with all the latency and weather vulnerability that implies. Cell service is spotty at best. Your backup plan for everything is self-sufficiency or a long drive to civilization. The community is sparse, self-selected, and includes a mix of park rangers, Mikosuke tribal members, airboat operators, and people who moved here specifically because it's the opposite of everywhere else they've ever been. Social life is limited to whoever's at the convenience store or the annual gatherings that bring the scattered population together to remember they're technically neighbors. Employment is Everglades related or remote. The median income is difficult to estimate given the small population and mixed economic activities, but it's safe to assume well below average unless you're running a successful tour operation or working a park service job with federal benefits and hazard pay. A park ranger told us, Ochopi is what you get when the only requirement for being a town is having a post office. We have that, barely. Everything else is optional. We're not a town, we're a zip code with delusions of grandeur and really good wildlife viewing. Hurricane risk is real but different than coastal areas. Storm surge doesn't hit here because you're inland, but flooding from rainfall and wind damage absolutely do. The 2017 hurricane season caused extended flooding that made some areas impassable for weeks. Recovery is slow because you're not a priority when you're 100 people in the Everglades, and there are cities with millions waiting for power. Crime is functionally zero because there's nobody to commit crimes against and nowhere to go after. The biggest dangers are environmental, heat exhaustion, wildlife encounters, and getting lost in the backcountry where your cell phone is a paperweight and your GPS stops working when the tree canopy gets thick. Picture this: sunset on the Tamiami Trail, the sky turning orange over endless sawgrass, the sound of frogs starting their evening chorus, an alligator crossing the road like it pays taxes here and has right of way. You're sitting outside the smallest post office in America, realizing that this building represents the absolute minimum requirement for a place to exist in the modern world. Your mail gets delivered here. Your packages arrive eventually. Your town has a name, a zip code, and almost nothing else. Your nearest neighbors are measured in miles, not houses. Your grocery run is an hour each way. Your life operates on a rhythm dictated by weather, wildlife, and the knowledge that you live in one of the last truly wild places in Florida. And that's exactly what you wanted. That's why you're here, because everywhere else stopped being worth it. We started in Apalachicola, where oysters make a comeback, and 2,200 people felt like a crowd. We dropped to Cedar Key's artist colony of 702. We stopped in Matlacha, where the buildings are painted brighter than logic suggests, and hurricanes are a lifestyle choice. We visited Casadaga, where your neighbors talk to the dead professionally, and the streets are dirt by design. We ended in Ochapi, where roughly 100 people share a post office the size of a closet, and the Everglades is your backyard. These 12 places are hidden for a reason. They require trade-offs most people won't make. Remoteness for affordability, quirks for character, hurricane risk for waterfront access, isolation for peace, dirt roads for preservation, mosquitoes for nature. They're not perfect, they're not convenient, they're definitely not for everyone, but they're real. They're affordable by Florida standards, which is saying something in 2026, and they're still here, surviving in the gaps between development booms, catering to nobody except the people who choose them deliberately and stay despite the logical reasons to leave. The pattern is clear. Florida's hidden gems are hidden because they're hard to reach, hard to insure, hard to make a living in, or just plain hard to explain to people who think Florida means Disney, South Beach, and retirement communities with gates and golf carts. They reward commitment, punish casual interest, and offer something increasingly rare in modern America: authenticity that hasn't been packaged for tourists or optimized for Instagram. These towns exist for people who are done with crowds, done with traffic, done with paying premium prices for mediocre experiences, done with the feeling that every place worth living has been focus grouped, gentrified, and optimized until it's lost whatever made it worth discovering in the first place. If you're tired of that, these towns are waiting. Just know what you're signing up for. Bring bug spray. Accept the lack of Starbucks. Make peace with driving for groceries. Understand that your neighbors chose this place for the same reasons you're considering it, because everywhere else stopped being worth it. If this resonated, hit that like button. Share this with someone who's been complaining about rent or traffic or the feeling that authentic places don't exist anymore. Subscribe if you want more hidden places that tourism forgot to ruin and developers haven't discovered yet. Drop a comment telling us which Florida town we missed, or which one you'd actually move to tomorrow if you could. Now go find your version of hidden Florida before it stops being hidden, before the post office gets bigger, before the roads get paved, before someone decides it needs a Starbucks.